This question requires students to explain the characteristics of externality as well as public goods in how it leads to market failure, citing relevant examples to support the explanation. So because there are two concepts to explain, students should keep their explanations concise and yet at the same time maintain different paragraphs for the analysis of concept and another for that example. What students require for this question is to firstly understand and be able to define the characteristics of public goods of non-excludability and non-rivalry. Secondly, they must also know how to explain how these characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalry can actually lead to the problem of market failure. Thirdly, they must be able to explain the characteristics of public goods and using a relevant example such as national defense, which we'll discuss later. Fourth, they must be able to explain how positive or negative externalities lead to the problem of market failure and use the concept of dead weight loss in their analysis. And lastly, they must be able to use the concept of externality using a relevant example each. For the positive externality, the description of productivity gain from education services, and for the negative externality, we can discuss about the congestion from road usage. For the structure of essay, in the introduction, students should firstly define what externality and public goods are. Students should then move on to state that positive and negative externalities, along with public goods, will lead to allocative inefficiency and therefore market failure occurs. Moving on to the main body, students should take the first perspective to explain the characteristics of public goods and how it results in market failure. So students should firstly describe the two characteristics. Firstly, public goods are actually non-rival. This implies that the consumption and production of the good will not deny another party from consumption, and this actually facilitates sharing. In this case, there is actually zero marginal cost in the production and the consumption of the good. For the next characteristics, public goods are non-excludable, and this actually implies that the non-payee can consume the good without paying for it. And this, unlike the case of non-rivalry, this allows for sharing. As such, the combination of non-rivalry and non-excludability will result in the problem of free ridership. Consequently, private firms will not produce public goods since consumers cannot be charged. And therefore, the absence of public good will lead to, in this case, complete market failure, where there is actually zero level of net social benefits that are derived and gained. Moving on to the second perspective, we'll explain why national defense, in this case our example for public good, is considered a public good, using the two characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalry. Firstly, national defense is non-excludable in production and consumption. This is because the benefits of political stability will be enjoyed by every single individual in the country, including those people who do not pay for those services. Secondly, national defense is non-rival because there is no additional cost that is necessary and is incurred when the benefits is extended to an additional citizen. As a result, the cost of production of national defense services remains the same regardless of the number of citizens residing in the country. So this explains non-rivalry. Next, we'll move on to the third perspective to explain the characteristics of externality and why it is considered as a form of market failure. Firstly, we start by explaining that externalities refer to third-party effects that society will experience despite not engaging in direct consumption and production of that good or service. For positive externalities, the external benefit on the society is actually not accounted for by the consumers. This will create external benefits that will lead to the condition of the underproduction and underconsumption, which incurs dead weight loss. Conversely, for negative externality, the external cost on the society is not accounted for by the consumers. This implies that this will create external costs that will lead to the condition of an overproduction and hence overconsumption, incurring dead weight loss. Hence, in the absence of government intervention, externalities will lead to the problem of market failure. Moving on, we will then explain in a similar fashion how the examples of productivity gain from education service is a form of positive externality, while the problem of traffic congestion from road usage is a form of negative externality. For education services, this positive externality is seen in terms of the development of a productive labor force, which will actually reduce the cost of production. Now, this underproduction and hence the underconsumption of education services will lead to a deadweight loss. What is this deadweight loss about? This can be explained through the failure to attain more investment and employment opportunities due to the lack of productive workers. Moving on to the example of road usage as contributing to negative externality, it is seen in terms of the issue of traffic congestion, which will increase the cost of traveling and also the cost of production for firms. Hence, this overproduction and hence overconsumption of road usage will lead to deadweight loss, and once again we explain that this deadweight loss is exemplified through the failure to attain more investment and more employment opportunities due to the traffic congestion. In conclusion, we will state that the understanding of externality and public goods is based on the characteristics of these two terms, and also that the absence of government intervention will lead to market failure. In the first case for public goods, that is a complete market failure, and in the second case for externalities, be it positive or negative externalities, it is a case of partial market failure.